We'll get started. So, hello everyone. Welcome to another lecture of the Rocky Mountain Map Society. I am your host, Angel Abud Madrid, the president of the society, and I welcome all of our members and all of those who are not members, but they are going to be so fascinated with our talks that will become members soon. And to all members of other map societies that have been gathering around in Zoom under these times and have access to all sorts of fascinating lectures from all around the country. So hopefully you get to enjoy a different one this tonight. Because as you may associate Rocky Mountain Map Society with the West, the Rocky Mountain region, and indeed, that's our main focus. And in fact, the last talk we had was about Lewis and Clark. But now we're going to cross the Atlantic and we're going to go all the way up to the old continent, to a city in the north part of Italy that it's mostly known because of its rice, of its big, nice risotto, Vercelli. But as we're going to find out, it's also famous because it has a very mysterious map, and we're going to find all about it tonight. But before we do that, we are going to have our program director, Naomi Heiser, to give you a peek, just a teaser of what's to come in terms of talks from our society, so that you stay tuned with us. So, Naomi, what's up in the horizon?
Thank you, Angel. Just everyone, my internet connection seems to be telling me it's unstable, so hopefully I can get through this without cutting out. So welcome. Before we get to tonight's speaker, I have a few announcements about Rocky Mountain Map Society hosted programs and collaborative programs with Washington Map Society for the spring season of 2021. On February 22nd, coming up soon at 5 o'clock Mountain Time, Ron Gibbs will give a talk called On the Brink of Disaster, George Washington and the American Revolution, 1775 through 1776, which will discuss the research that led him to his new book. So this one will be hosted by Washington Map Society, and you can register through their website or through the link that I send out in our email newsletters. On March 23rd at 5 o'clock Mountain Time, history professor Susan Schulten, who's a very big favorite of Rocky Mountain Map Society members, she's from University of Denver, and she'll speak on Make the Map All White, Visual Strategies in the 18th and 19th Amendments. This talk will also be hosted by Washington Map Society. Again, on April 6th at 5:30 Mountain Time, our own Wesley Brown will speak on the Delisle maps of North America, Louisiana, and the West. This meeting will be hosted by us, Rocky Mountain Map Society, and the link will be in our emails as well as on our website as we get closer to that date. And you can also find many more joint Map Societies programs in the spring, for the spring and early summer at Washington Map Society's website. So finally, stay tuned for news about Rocky Mountain Map Society's 30th anniversary celebration. We are going to plan something we hope for the end of the summer. So now I'd like to welcome Dr. Helen Davies to Colorado. She recently joined the English department at University of Colorado, Colorado Springs as an assistant professor of digital humanities. Helen works primarily on medieval maps and multispectral imaging. Her work can be found in Imago Mundi and a critical companion to English Mappe Mundi of the 12th and 13th centuries. So tonight she will enlighten us about the medieval Mappe Mundi tradition and reveal how multispectral imaging allowed for recovery of the Vercelli map. So take it away. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that very kind introduction. I am going to be the really annoying person and ask if you guys can all see my screen. Okay, cool, great. All right, so let's get started here. Okay, so medieval maps are strange, shall we say. They definitely come from a different tradition than this type of map. When we talk casually, colloquially about maps, this is what we mean. However, medieval Mappe Mundi are very different than this. So I want to kind of introduce a few concepts to make sure we're all on the same page before we start to investigate the Vercelli Mappe Mundi. So this is obviously the very famous map of the London Underground, and it is a great example of how something that we refer to as a map, something that we use to navigate, still is somewhat devoid of a real geographic truth. There is a fairly famous prank that people will play on tourists if you go to London, where you can tell them to go across half a dozen different stops through a few different lines, and then they pop up a block from where they started, because the underground map is somewhat separate than the above ground geography. Similarly, we are quite used to today trying to map out more ethereal concepts, such as the internet. So here we have a map of the internet that tries to map it by popularity and by size of website. It also ranks it by country. So there's still a loose geographic basis, but you're really mapping out concepts and ideas here. You're mapping out kind of a more ethereal sort of connection rather than a physical place that you use to get from point A to point B, which helps us think about the medieval maps in a different way. So this is the most famous of the large mappamundi, of the large wall maps from the 13th century. And this is the Hereford map. And so while this looks radically different than the kind of concept that we are used to thinking about as a map, it still functions in some of the similar ways. It still kind of helps us understand the world around us. It can loosely help you navigate from point A to point B. And it also contains a heck of a lot of information about the world around you. So just to kind of orient everybody to kind of help us understand what's going on with this medieval type of map, I want to kind of show you some broad strokes of this. So we have the world broken down into 3 different continents. Asia is at the top. The map is literally oriented to the east. And then you have Europe in the bottom left-hand corner and Africa in the bottom right-hand corner. You see the 3 oceans or the 3 seas that kind of split it together. So you have the Mediterranean, and then you have 2 rivers that on more simplified versions of this map really separate out Asia from Europe from Africa. And then you have the ocean going around the edge of the world, as well as kind of a frame that provides a more theological perspective on the world. So here is a broad stroke of medieval maps. These are the large mappamundi. These are the large world maps of the 13th century. You have the Hereford map, which is the most famous that we just saw. You have the Ebstorf map on the far right-hand side of the screen here. Now the Ebstorf map was huge. It was several meters high, but it was rather unfortunately destroyed in World War II. It had a little bit of an unfortunate incident with a bombing raid. And then in the middle, we have the lone understudied medieval map from this tradition. This is the Vercelli mappamundi. And the thing that we're going to continue to come back to is the kind of poor state of its survival, the damaged state and the kind of illegible text, illegible images, and the real struggles that one has when trying to read and understand this medieval map. So to kind of provide a schematic for the brief introduction I gave earlier, here we have the Hereford map on the far left. You have Asia at the top, you have Europe on the bottom left, and then you have Africa on the bottom, on the bottom right, and then you have, Africa on the bottom right. And you can see that here on this TO map. So this simplified schematic in the middle really helps show that kind of simple orientation. Asia at the top, Europe, and then Africa. And so the more elaborate mappamundi that we're going to be looking at today, these develop out of this TO schematic here. So this TO map is a very simple diagram that is found in a lot of medieval manuscripts, and it's used to help organize information. It's used to simply show how the continents relate to each other. And the Hereford map and the related tradition kind of builds on that with the inclusion of a heck of a lot more information. And the image on the far right side of the screen is basically a modern globe shifted to try and match the orientation of the TO map. However, as we saw earlier, the Vercelli mappamundi is really a struggle to read. It's really quite hard to understand what's going on with it. So the Hereford map and the images of the Ebstorf map really allow us to understand that the medieval mappamundi kind of go much further than just showing you how to get from point A to point B. They really, really show you a larger worldview. They contain a lot of information, such as references to classical stories or to biblical information. You can kind of see at a glance here that the Red Sea is parted on the Hereford map, and it's parted so that Moses is separating the Red Sea always. As a quick reference, somewhere in this region, there is a giant sheep, which is my favorite. And it's the golden fleece that Jason and the Argonauts are going to go get in that famous classical story. So these medieval maps really function as a visual encyclopedia as well, and provide a heck of a lot more information about the world as it was conceived of. And so being able to access the Vercelli map, being able to read the Vercelli map would really allow us to unearth, unpack all of the information that's contained within that document. And especially as there are only 2 other semi-surviving maps of this tradition, of it, immediate tradition, then it really would provide an important witness to the contemporary maps. However, like I said, the map is illegible. So one of the things that we did is we applied multispectral imaging to the text. So what is multispectral imaging? Multispectral imaging is a technique that allows you to photograph a damaged, a faded document under multiple bands of light, and then you can statistically combine these different images to recover text that's no longer visible. So the document that you're looking at here was imaged by the Lazarus Project in 2013. It is an old version of the Bible. It predates Jerome's translation of the Vulgate. And the text as it stands under natural light is entirely illegible. But as you can see here, after multispectral imaging, you can entirely recover the text. So Gregory Hayworth at the University of Rochester is currently providing a new transcription of this old translation of the Bible based on these images. So this is back to, again, the before image. And I just want to draw your attention to the little pink blob on the side there. It's some nice tuberculosis. You would have kissed the manuscript in an act of devotion, an act of prayer, and it would have transferred some of the bacteria to it. So here we have the Vercelli map. As you can see, it is really a struggle to read. The top half of it is faded. The bottom half of it has had some sort of unfortunate incident that has rendered it largely illegible. Now, I'm aware that most people in this room, and so we really want to get back this information, and this is where the multispectral imaging comes in. But I'm aware that most people in this room, in this virtual room, as it may be, are not medievalists. So I kind of want to take us through the material circumstances of this map to try and help us understand both the recovery process and everything kind of associated with the document. So when we think of medieval manuscripts, this is the kind of thing that we think of normally. Very pretty, some beautiful images, and some slightly strange images to our eyes. I picked this particular manuscript image because the person being shot is Saint Sebastian, who is the patron saint of plague, which feels appropriate in these COVID times. So when we're thinking about the medieval manuscript, we really need to think about the different components of it. And so what multispectral imaging does is it sort of helps us see how these different components are related, so kind of draw them out to help them become more legible again. So if you start with the medieval manuscript, you start with a parchment, you have a dead sheep that is then stretched out to form the basis for this map. The important thing is that the ink that goes on these maps is frequently slightly acidic. So it sinks down into the substrate, into the parchment that we just saw. And so if you're trying to recover text from a medieval map, you can recover text that's no longer visible on the surface because it has actually sunk down into the surface below. The image I've shown here is on paper, but what you see pretty clearly is the acidity of the ink. It's literally eaten through the paper here. And so one of the reasons that we're able to recover the information from the Vercelli map is because the ink has sunk down into the manuscript below it. It's sunk down into the substrate underneath it. So if you think about a tattoo, you can sort of start to think about how that ink is there, but it sort of slowly fades, and that's sort of roughly kind of the comparable process. And so multispectral imaging is used to recover that faded text, is used to recover that image, that material, the ink that is no longer visible on the surface but has sunk down into the parchment underneath it. And so here you have an image of a palincess. Multispectral imaging was first developed for use in cultural heritage, for use on manuscripts because of a palincess. And so a palincess is a text that has been written And then over centuries, frequently, the text has either become illegible, people no longer speak that language, the handwriting is hard to decipher, or in cases of religious text, maybe the liturgy has changed and the relevant text is just no longer needed. So in a world where you're not popping out to CVS to buy a new notebook, you are instead needing to kill a sheep whenever you need a new piece of paper, you can instead scrape off text that is no longer needed. You can erase material that is no longer relevant to your library, to your collection, to whatever the case may be. And then you kind of normally turn the text 90 degrees and you write across it again. And so one of the things that multispectral imaging does is it really tries to get back that underneath text. It was famously developed for the Archimedes Palincess project. And so the Archimedes Palincess project had a manuscript which we knew had a lost text of the ancient Greek mathematician Archimedes. You could read enough of it to identify it, but you couldn't read enough of it to get the whole text back. And so a remote sensing technique, a technique that is normally used associated with satellites and the like, was then changed and transformed and utilized to recover the underneath text. And so you can see here just some cool little images from the Archimedes Palincess project where they were able to recover diagrams of Archimedes as well as the text. And so they were able to bring back an entirely lost text of Archimedes back into the discussion of his work, which was a huge find. But for the important thing for our discussion is that we were able to then use this technology for other materials, other manuscripts, including the Vercelli map. So how does this work? So when we are using the multispectral imaging, you take a series of photographs from the ultraviolet through the visible and into the infrared. And so these images are taken at specific bandwidths, which can then be combined later. This little infographic done by Roger Easton at RIT really kind of shows the difference in some of these images. So you have the ultraviolet image, and so ultraviolet short waves, it bounces off the top of the surface of the manuscript, and it causes the ink and the parchment to react in one way. Then all the way through the visible spectrum, it's reacting slightly different each time, and it's recovering slightly different information from the page, from the substrate. And all of this information can then be combined together. So there are a number of different multispectral imaging systems, a number of different kind of technology that can be used here, but here's the Lazarus Project system at the University of Rochester. And so this also has our RTI arc in the middle of it, but you can see the system in the background. Here's a bit more of a close-up. For those of you that are familiar with digitization, more traditional digitization techniques will be familiar with what a copy stand looks like. You have the camera, you have the base underneath it in which you capture the object. However, this camera is a little bit different. It's a monochromatic lens, so it doesn't need to censor out, it doesn't need to filter or determine what color of light it's capturing. If you have your iPhone, for instance, it has a number of filters built into the camera so that it can determine what color of light is being recorded in that digital photograph. This camera doesn't do that, but it doesn't need to because we control the light source. And so it only needs to record the data as accurately as possible. And then the other slightly really interesting thing about this camera lens is that it's made of a compound that mimics the quality of crystal. So most lenses, most camera lenses will bend light outside of the visible range. So it will bend ultraviolet and infrared photographs. However, high-end multispectral imaging equipment is calibrated to make sure that it can accurately capture data well outside of the visible spectrum. Here again is the Lazarus Project multispectral imaging system. And I just want to draw your attention here. Also, the lights are special and slightly different. You have narrow band LEDs. So instead of shooting bright white light at an object, which can cause damage to the object, heat, light, these things are not good for art or manuscripts because they can literally yeah, they'll like kind of crinkle it with heat. It's not great. Nobody wants that. No conservator is going to be happy about that. So you have LEDs, which emit narrow amounts of energy, but also narrowly let us control what bands of light are being shot at an object so that we can capture that data. Here you have what's called a transmissive light. And so if you have an object with where the ink has eaten into it, as we saw earlier in that image, then we can capture where the parchment is thinner or where the paper is thinner. And so if you shine light up from underneath, you can get kind of a ghost impression of letters from where there is, you know, just less material there now. My colleague, Alex Zawacki, is on this call, so I'm just going to point out that he put up, one night he was struggling with getting the lights working. He put up the patron saint of lost causes on the wall. And at that point, the lights kept working. And so we now also continually have the patron saint of lost causes, which for those of you that have ever worked with a digital project will know that that is a thing you always need. Okay, so that's how the technology works. That's a background for how manuscripts work, how the technology works, and what we're aiming to do here. We're aiming to recover the Vercelli map. And now let's turn to actually focus on the map itself. So again, here is a before image. This is what the map looks like under natural light. So to give a little bit of background to this map currently exists in Vercelli, Italy, in the chapter library associated with the cathedral there. And the really cool thing is it's still in the same room as would have been the medieval cathedral school. So that's always just kind of fun. But what you have here is a document that was rediscovered in 1908. There's been a lot of discussion since its rediscovery in 1908 by Carlo Herrera about the provenance of the manuscript. So what we mean by that is the map of English origin, is the map of French origin. There was one early 1900 scholar who argued that it had a Spanish provenance, but that was purely based on the fact that he thought that some of the cartoons, some of the little images shared a passing resemblance to the Catalan atlas. And so the kind of consensus has long settled that it's maybe English or French. There are some scholars still today that are arguing for an Italian provenance. And I have to say, for a long time, I was fairly set against them, but they may be persuading me recently. And so there's a lot of questions about this map. They don't know who developed it. They don't know what country it came from. It is frequently assigned an English provenance because the Hereford Map and the Ebstorf Map both have English connections. And so it seems likely that it's coming out of a tradition, at least largely rooted in England. There has been some recent work that argues, I think successfully, that it should be considered an Anglo-French school of cartography, so one school of mapping for both sides of the channel. And this is the sort of question that recovering the map can begin to address. We want to start to think about not only, you know, the small details of being able to read the text, being able to read the specific cities on this map, but the larger questions of like, where did it come from? Who created it? Because these questions are essential to trying to understand the arguments of the map, the kind of broader claims that this map may have. So with multispectral imaging, this is how the map appears under natural light in Vercelli today. After multispectral imaging, we've been able to recover almost the entire map. And so you can see here, it's really a struggle to read. After multispectral imaging, it becomes almost as clear as print. And I want to draw your attention to the bottom bit here and the kind of wonky look to it. And that is because that trying to get the Vercelli map was imaged in 20 different tiles. So to maintain the spatial resolution of the document, we imaged it in tiny little photographs, which could then be blown up and processed. When you stitch these tiles back together, it creates this slightly checkerboard effect. Now, the interesting thing is here is what this shows us is that while this is all one document, while this is all connected and has obviously gone through a lot of the same historic processes, the spectral response to the different points in this map are slightly different. The map is responding differently to different processing techniques. So I want to walk you through some of the smaller details of this maps and some of the before and afters. So here we have what the Western Mediterranean. So to kind of orient you in the larger map here, this follows the same pattern as the Hereford map does. So you have Asia on top, you have Europe in the bottom left, and then you have Africa in the bottom right. Pardon me, my throat is getting dry. And then you have the same rivers dividing the continents as you had on both the TO map and on the Hereford map. The Mediterranean is here. The two other rivers are right here. And so you get the same basic TO structure to the map, though it looks slightly different here. The Vercelli map is unusual in how crowded the waterways are with islands. So seeing the larger TO structure is slightly challenging, but it's still there. So here we are at the very western edge of the Mediterranean, or the very bottom of the map. And we know it's the western edge of the Mediterranean because we have the Pillars of Hercules here. And so here, just to again orient you, you have Europe, you have North Africa, and you have the Mediterranean here. So before, after. Multispectral imaging really helps us recover the ink that has sunk down into the manuscript, that is just no longer visible on the surface of the manuscript at all. Here is another before and after. You see in this section, it's not totally eradicated like it is on the western edge of the Mediterranean there, but it has faded beyond the point of legibility. And so you can kind of struggle through some of that text, but it hurts. But on the right, you see it after multispectral imaging, and you can see that you can really recover a lot of the different inscriptions, you can recover the cities, and you can really read a lot of that material. Now, I want to draw your attention to one of the quirks of the Vercelli map. On the top of your screen there, you see a series of 4 blank boxes that look vaguely like the TARDIS, maybe. They look like some kind of creature from Doctor Who, and but they have no names on them. And so the Vercelli map has undergone a lot of controversy over the years because people have argued about why these cities are left blank. Now, one famous argument was that this was used as a draft. And so if you look at the Vercelli map as compared to, for example, the Hereford map, it's a lot less pretty, for lack of a better technical term. It's a lot less detailed. There's a lot less kind of high-end art going on. Instead, it's a lot more just, here's the information. And one other thing is that if you're familiar with looking at Latin manuscripts, you can see that also the names of the cities are a lot more abbreviated, which it tends to be a sign of it being a slightly less high prestige object. However, there has also been some discussion, and I would argue correctly, about the idea, not that this was a draft for another map, but that this was just a very working document. So if you think about the fact that maps, you know, like if in your own grade school classroom, you would have had a map hanging on the wall. I argue that this is why these cities are left blank, is that this was just a very work-a-day document. You can see some evidence of the map being updated or changes to the handwriting going on. There's scratch outs on it. It seems like perhaps some of this information was left blank so that it could be added to or changed. The other piece of evidence for this map not being a draft for a larger, more prestigious wall map is that Vercelli has what is a fairly unique collection of surviving manuscripts. So it has what it calls rotuli, but are basically these posters. They are kind of yay big, and they show a number of different things. They have things like the genealogy of Christ, which you would have been expected to learn in a medieval classroom. They have also things that you would expect to find in a classroom today. So there is one of these rotuli that, a rotulus, that shows how to find a right angle of a triangle. And it's the kind of thing that you would expect to find in a classroom. So it is perhaps not too surprising that we find this map that has some rough edges to it, that has some abbreviations and has some blanks left on it, of roughly the same size and shape as the other classroom documents, to be just used in the classroom. It was meant to be handled. It was meant to be a teaching tool. And for those of us that are teachers, you know that the things that you use as teaching tools don't always end up in pristine condition at the end. By the time they've been passed around a classroom, by the time people experiment on them, it gets worn, it gets used. And I would argue that that's what the Vercelli map was expected to do. And that is why these cities are left blank. It's a place to put new knowledge, new pieces of information, whether it's new cities that are founded and discovered or just new cities that are deemed important. One of the things that you see on medieval maps a lot is this inclusion of much larger pieces of information, of other stories, of other myths that can be used to help understand what is going on, not only on this particular text, but in text as a whole, kind of in the medieval classroom. So here's another before and after. This is kind of part of North Africa. I particularly like this because you see these little guys here. You have just like a cyclops hanging out with his buddy, you know, as you do. But you start to see a lot of other kind of creatures here. And then it says, and then here you have, it says, here are the altars of the philosophers, as well as a bunch of geographical information. The Vercelli map is interesting in that it has these blocks of text, which are direct quotations from classical authors about the land or the country that they're describing there. Medieval maps are famous for being centered around Christian geography. So the Psalter map, for instance, basically locates the world in Jesus's belly. You see other maps where you see just the feet of Christ sticking out at the edge of the world. The Hereford map has Christ kind of ascendant above the world. And Jerusalem is frequently at the center of the world. So on the Hereford map, Jerusalem is right in the middle of the map, for instance. However, the Vercelli map is slightly different in that its geography doesn't necessarily follow the same Christian outline in the same way. However, it's still, the important Christian sites are still definitely important. And so here, as one more before and after, we have Rome as it appears under natural light, and then you have Rome as it appears after multispectral imaging. So it's definitely not perfect. There's definitely still room for improvement, but you can decipher the city. You can locate one of the most important locations in the medieval worldview. So to continue some more before and afters, you have here on the top, on the left-hand side of the screen, you have what looks like a completely blank section of map. After some preliminary processing, you can start to determine that there are in fact cities there. And after some more complete processing, you can find Spain. So this is what Spain would have looked like on the medieval map. And here you can locate the important Spanish cities of the time. One of my favorite figures on the Vercelli map, and this is where medieval maps start to become slightly different than our contemporary understanding of cartography. So a lot of contemporary maps, you know, show the world, like the one I started off with today. Or you have ones such as the map of the internet, which just show concepts. The medieval maps kind of are a blending of the two, where you have a lot of geography. You know, obviously it's still important. You're kind of organizing all of this information on a visual platform, but you also have outside information. You have, for instance, the King of France riding an ostrich on top of a mountain in North Africa. So this is a genuinely weird figure, but you can see here that it says, you can see here that there is an inscription. And so if you zoom in, it says Philip Rex Francia, so Philip, King of France. But he is in this kind of unusual position. He is riding this giant bird, and we know it's an ostrich because it has a horseshoe in its mouth, obviously. In the Middle Ages, the ostrich was associated with its ability to eat iron. And so the ostrich was frequently depicted with either some nails nearby or very frequently with a horseshoe in its mouth. And that was one of the ways you identified it as an ostrich. Now Philip here is located on top of a mountain, which if you look at certain images, you can see it says Mons Athos. And so he's on top of Mount Atlas. And then this inscription right here describes Atlas as being named for the philosopher who held up the world. And so you find the King of France riding an ostrich on top of the mountain, literally positioned between heaven and earth, positioned holding up the sky. Now, I'm not going to go into it too much here, but we were talking before everybody signed on about some of the weird medieval symbolism of an ostrich. And it's important to keep in mind that the ostrich was sort of a double-edged sword. The ostrich could be read as a symbol of truth, a symbol of religious devotion. The ostrich in the Middle Ages had the opposite kind of connotation that we find today with the ostrich of burying its head in the sand. Instead, the ostrich kept its gaze heavenward. The ostrich was continually looking at the skies, looking at the stars. And so you kind of have this positive religious connotation with being, devout and all this. But the ostrich was also known to neglect its young in the medieval bestiary tradition. So you get this kind of both positive and negative symbol that the King of France is riding in his location between heaven and earth on top of Mount Atlas. One kind of great example of the sort of strange materials that you would find on a medieval map is this section in Asia. And so here's the before image. And so you can see the text is faded. It's hard to read. It's not the end of the world, but it is quite faded. But after multispectral imaging, then you're able to recover all of the text and all of the images, and you can get some kind of strange surprises. So this big block of text, this is earthly paradise. So if you're familiar with medieval maps, you may be familiar with like the Hereford Map, which shows earthly paradise, as most medieval maps do from the Latin Christian tradition. But on that map, it's a circle and it's directly it directly parallels the shape of Jerusalem. So the two are shown to mirror each other. The Vercelli map does not have any such conceit. It doesn't seek to mirror Jerusalem in any way, shape, or form. Instead, it's this giant square on the eastern part of the map. And if you translate all of the Latin within that square, it kind of gives you a little bit of an explanation. It explains that you're in Asia and it explains what Asia was named for, but then it explicitly says that the map is oriented to the east because earthly paradise is in the east. And so the whole map is shifted to make earthly paradise prominent and to kind of put earthly paradise at the top of the map. And this is where the Vercelli map, I think, starts to get really interesting. So if the entire map is oriented to the east, literally oriented to the east, so that you can have earthly paradise right at the top of the map, it's not shown at the very top of the map. It's not actually at the very edge of the world. The Vercelli map has things further east than that. It has things further at the edge of the world. And so if you look here, what you see here is, a tree, and then a sun and a moon. And then if you can read closely here, this says Rex Alexander. So you have Alexander the Great praying to the tree of the sun and the moon at the very edge of this map. And then the little inscription under these guys says basically it's the three holy guys. And this comes directly from a popular medieval text called the Alexandrian Romances. And so in these adventure tales of Alexander the Great, he goes all the way east. You can also find versions of this in the letter from Alexander and Aristotle. He goes all the way east on his famous campaigns, and he gets to the very edge of the known world. And at that point, he meets these three holy men who bring him into the garden with this oracular tree. And they let him pray to the tree of the sun and the moon. And he is allowed to ask the tree questions. So he asked the tree, will I ever return to my family? Will I ever see my mother again? Will I ever return to my homeland? And the tree tells him, no, he will not. You will die within the year. You will never see your mother again, and you will never make it back to your homeland. And so the thing that this map chooses to prioritize as the very edge of the known world is not actually earthly paradise, but it is this pseudo-mythical account of Alexander the Great getting to the very edge of the world. So the thing that actually marks the known boundaries of the world here is not Christian theology, but it is instead the kind of extent to which, like the extent to which a European got going east, or if you prefer to think of it, the extent to which a military got going east, and then brought back the records back to Europe after that. You do see a series of islands here, even further than that. But what this is the same thing that you saw in the Hereford map. It's the world ocean, the ocean that is known as the boundary of the earth. And so this is again another instance of the Vercelli map choosing to fulfill all of its waterways with islands. And so here in this one island, I just want to draw your attention to because I think it's really cute. It is full of ants, and that's what these little creatures are. And these ants are supposed to be moving gold around. But this is a direct quotation from Herodotus. And so what you see here is the fact that medieval cartography is directly tied into the textual tradition. It is not a pictorial representation that is separate from the text that students may have been learning in school. It is directly tied into that. And so you have, for instance, you have classical stories / medieval romances, depending on which version you think this came from, right at the edge of the world, shaping the very geography of the world. You have Christian textual traditions shaping the world, literally orienting the map to the east. And then you have classical quotations filling these fantastic islands, these mythical islands right around the edge of the world in this world ocean. And so one of the things that I would argue with medieval maps is that they do show us geographic relationships. They show us a basic understanding of how things were connected together. Now, they may not show you that Rome was 20 miles from Ostia or whatever. Instead, they may show you that Rome is slightly northier of the city below it. And so you get this relational geography rather than a direct mathematical one. Now, those of us that grew up in more rural areas, for instance, are kind of already familiar with this sort of relational geography. You go 15 minutes down the road. If you see the big tree, you've gone too far, hang a left when you see the red barn. That's the kind of relationship, geographic relationship that's going on in these maps. And if you follow the waterways around, it really is that kind of proportional connection of geography. However, it is important to know that this sense of geography is still very much imbued with these texts. These texts are shaping the world and kind of shaping where these these geographic entities are put. So the Vercelli map has the different kinds of information all put together on one platform. Now, the geographic, the classical, the textual, all of these things form together to form one visual encyclopedia in the form of this medieval cartography. I would argue one step further, though, that this was, again, I mentioned earlier, I think this is a teaching tool, and that's kind of why the map survived in such a rough state. But also, as a teaching tool, it helps organize all this information. So you don't need to know that, necessarily that Rome is 20 miles from Ostia. Instead, you need to know that Rome and Ostia are important locations in classical Rome. And so we'll have them, pictured on the map. You need to remember the Alexander story. So there's a little nugget on the map to help you think of the larger story. There is the sheep in near Colchis, and that will help you think of the Medea and the Jason and the Argonaut story. And so all of these different strands of information work together to make medieval cartography not only geographic compendium, a kind of map of the world, literally, but also a visual reference guide, a visual set of resources to help navigate between all that. And obviously the Vercelli map, it's only possible for us to interpret all of that and to read all of that because of the technology of multispectral imaging. So I want to end my little talk here by talking about some of the multispectral imaging projects mentioned in my talk and also in Colorado at large. So the Lazarus project did the imaging for the Vercelli map, and then I did the processing of those images. And the Lazarus project also has all of the lab equipment that I showed earlier in this talk. And so the Lazarus project is out of the University of Rochester. It's run by Dr. Gregory Hayworth, and Alex Zawacki does a lot of the day-to-day coordinations, a lot of the day-to-day planning of the project. Lazarus Project Imaging is the website, and you can contact anybody on that lab through there. I'm starting a new multispectral imaging project here at UCCS in Colorado Springs, and hopefully we'll get to continue to work with maps, but also working with a lot of local history and local documents. And then Jessica Tribbett, who is up in Denver, has started a new Institute of Cultural Heritage Imaging, and her email address can be found here as well. So thank you so much. I'm excited to hear any questions you guys may have. Please let me know. Yeah, I'm excited to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Helen. Really appreciate that. Fascinating talk. So I'm going to go through some questions. First of all, I just want to ask, do the people that have the map have access to what? Did you give them a copy of this new image? Do they?
Oh, yeah. They have all of the data. They may not have every single stitched together image, but they have all of our data, and they will continue to get updated versions of the map as they continue to process everything.
Okay. From Chris, what is the size of the map?
Oh, Jesus. This one is about 3 feet high, 72 centimeters. It is all of the maps in the Vercelli collection, or all of the documents in the Vercelli are, I think, circa 2 to 3 feet.
Okay. A little bit of my technical question here from John Andrews. Has the map's parchment undergone isotopic analysis to determine its origin?
That is a great question. No, it has not. However, I would love to get some more equipment down to Vercelli. So one of the things that Dr. Gregory Hayworth was planning on putting together last summer, and hopefully we'll be able to continue to put together, is a team to go down and have, well, a sort of symposium using different sorts of technical techniques, imaging techniques, to kind of really dig into the material analysis and ask new questions of not only the Vercelli map, but all of the documents in that medieval collection. Those of you that may be familiar with Old English poetry, the Vercelli book is one of the most famous books of Old English poetry. So if you ever, I don't know, in college had to go through a Brit Lit survey or something, then a lot of that kind of texts are in Vercelli as well.
Oh, that's great. Patrick McGranahan has a question about not the Vercelli map, but can we explore that Archimedes document online? Any links?
Yeah. So there are a number of different ways to access the Archimedes Palincess project. There's a great pop sci kind of book about it that is really easy to read and a great explanation of it. But the actual data itself is hosted through, the Walters Art Museum. And they have all of the raw data that you can download and play with yourself. The findings have all been published in a number of different places.
Okay. Mike also gets a little bit technical here. Do you use ENVI software to process the multispectral imagery?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the Lazarus project uses ENVI to process multispectral imaging. ENVI was not designed for cultural heritage. It was not designed for manuscripts or maps or anything like that. But it has proven to be actually the most successful software to use in this kind of technology. And the ENVI folks are actually in Denver, and some of them are working directly with us, or with Jessica in particular, to kind of develop a cultural heritage package, an add-on for their software that is really quite wonderful and is by far the most powerful. However, it's worth noting that Keith Knox in Hawaii has just released a new software, an open access software called Hoku, that has a lot of promise to be a new simpler software designed specifically for these sort of multispectral imaging applications. And then Tanya Kleinhand at the Rochester Institute of Technology has also begun to develop her own processing software. So there are beginning to be a few alternatives, but ENVI remains basically the best.
Just a comment. Fascinating, and your explanations were very clear from Hannah Jones.
Thank you. That's wonderful.
Now, Lorraine seems like she wants to go and touch this map. She says, where is the map now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's actually still in Vercelli. It's in the chapter library in Vercelli. It is, yeah, hopefully, COVID will lessen and we can all go to Vercelli and see the map in person, because I would like to also go do that.
Mike, the earlier Mike Flaherty that talked about the MV software. Now he wants to know, do you use point clouds in your analysis?
I don't. So my main familiarity with point clouds is actually in photogrammetry. So in creating a 3D model from images of different cultural heritage objects. So I haven't actually used point clouds for looking at the Vercelli map, but if there's a technique that I should investigate with that, I would love to do so.
And he also has a question that I also have. Do you have any posters for sale for the process map so we can take a look at it in detail?
No, but that would be awesome. That's definitely a conversation to have with Vercelli and the archive itself there.
Okay. Wesley Brown, are the 4 rivers of paradise in the east?
Yes, yeah, they are. So that is a great question. So the interesting thing about the Vercelli map is that it describes the 4 rivers coming out of it. So it does have a visual cue of them, but it also has a big textual explanation of it. And those of you that are familiar with medieval geography will know that the paradise was supposed to have 4 rivers coming out of it, and a lot of the major world rivers were thought to be the same 4 rivers of paradise coming up and going under the earth at different points. And so you see those rivers on this map for sure.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned something very interesting, that this is not just a map that shows geography, but also in a way time, and it teaches us something. And so Naomi wants to know, are there any other examples of teaching maps like this in existence, or have most been lost?
So that is a great question. The short answer is no. The short answer is that the Vercelli map presents a unique survival. The kind of exception to that is that we know from textual descriptions that, for example, Hugh of St. Victor used to have a series of maps that he taught from. And it seems likely Dan Turkla has written a great article that argues that a lot of the Victorine monasteries, or the monasteries with connections to Hugh of St. Victor's pedagogy, also had similar maps for teaching purposes. However, none of those really survive, unless you believe that the Hereford Map was also used as a teaching document, which it may well have been.
Mm-hmm. Great. Seems like you know a lot about this map. And so Phil and Kimberly wants to know, how were you introduced to the map's existence?
So that's a great question. Thank you for that. So I was basically introduced to the map's existence through the Vercelli collection. I started my PhD working at the combination of multispectral imaging and digital humanities. And so one of the things that I was working with my PhD advisor was to kind of work through some basic processing of a lot of this data that he had recently acquired in Vercelli. And I kind of became obsessed with the map as part of that, and kind of wrote my whole dissertation on it.
So before you got interested, there was no way to read that map? There's just...
No, there was one dude in 1975 called Carlo Capello, who wrote a full-length study of it that is quite hard to find and is in Italian, but it does exist out there. However, the problem is that he was not a medievalist, and so his understanding of medieval Latin dramatically leaves something to be desired. And so in comparing my transcriptions to his, about a third of his are wrong. And so Heather Waka, Dr. Heather Waka, and I are going to produce a new digital edition of this map through Virtual Mappa, which is a medieval map hosting site out of University of Wisconsin-Madison. And so it's run by Martin Foys, and she and I are working together to create a new digital edition of this, complete with new transcriptions and translations of all the text blocks on it, so that you will be able to play around with it, to be able to really investigate it in a new level of detail. So hopefully that will be finished this summer.
And another question from Timothy, a question from Timothy Pickard. The city icons seem to be building A building with gable roof, surrounded by a wall, perhaps?
Yeah, it's a really interesting symbol. I don't quite know where the cartographer has gotten this from, but yes, that tends to be the generic European symbol for sure. So one of the things is that I spent a lot of time working on the cities that were located in Persia. So in modern Iran, on the map, mainly because I had a friend from Persia and we had a great time trying to figure through all the puzzle pieces of it together. But the interesting thing is that as you move east, and especially as you're in Persia and to a degree Arabia, the symbol for the city shifts. So it seems like there is some effort to represent a different architecture. If you were being a proper little literary scholar, you would say that this was an orientalizing influence going on the map, but I'm not sure what I think it is. I'm not sure if it is representing an awareness that you have shifted from perhaps the old Roman Empire into traditional Persian Empire territory, or if it is trying to represent an understanding of the architecture within those locations. But this very simplified symbol does shift as you get to different places within the map, which is super interesting.
Now, the map is packed with information. Kevin Saka wants to know, what is your personal favorite corner or spot on the map?
So I think, honestly, my favorite corner of the map is the picture of the giant sheep, because so what you have is you have the country of Georgia, basically, and it's got the city of Colchis, and then it's got an inscription that says, here's Colchis. It was ruled by King, I can't pronounce it right, but Oetes. And then it basically says, this is the sheep, this is the fleece that Jason and the Argonauts came to collect. And so you get a little brief snippet that tells you most of the Jason and the Argonauts, most of the Medea story, but the whole thing is centered on just this giant sheep. And the giant sheep is bigger than most cities on this map. And I just really love the absurdity of that.
I have a question. So all the equipment was taken to Vercelli and that's where it was done, or you transported the map somewhere else? Or?
No, so we took all the equipment to Vercelli itself. So the Lazarus project is sort of unique in high-end multispectral projects in that they can fit every single piece of equipment into a golf bag. And if you put a single golf ball in the golf bag, then it counts as sporting equipment. And so you can get it through TSA. And so the Lazarus project is able to take all of their equipment overseas, which has particular importance. As you would imagine, most institutions are not really willing to ship you their valuable documents. If a document is already faded, damaged, hard to read, they're not really going to want to pop it in the mail, though that has happened. So instead, it's a lot easier if you have the ability to go to them. One of the interesting things about the next generation of multispectral imaging equipment, particularly the ones being developed by Tanya Kleinhans, are that they will be super portable. They won't be quite as detailed, quite as good as some of the higher end systems, but they will be able to do a basic job, and they should be able to basically fit in a Pelican case, which you could take as a carry-on most flights.
Timothy Picard asks now another question. Would this map have been drawn by or annotated by monks, or by whom, you think?
That's a great question. Thank you so much for that. So the what an interesting question. It's hard to say is the sort of short answer. It almost definitely would have been people trained in a religious school. It's hard to say if they would have been monks per se, but they would have been people who had been through a cathedral school, who would have had a high level of education, which at the time would have almost definitely been administered by the church in some capacity.
Mm-hmm. Good, okay. Anybody else that wants to ask a question? Let me see. I don't see anything. Okay, well, that has been a wonderful presentation, Helen. We really, really appreciate it. Not only you deserve a good risotto after giving us this lecture, but why not celebrating with a wine from northern Italy, from the Piemonte, to celebrate for that nice talk that you gave us, transported us to the medieval ages, and it's a fantastic opportunity for us that mostly concentrate on the West. So thank you everybody for for being here. This is going to be a recording that's going to be on the Rocky Mountain Map Society website soon, so you can enjoy it if you want to watch it again. And good to and we hope to see you for the next talk. Naomi, when is the next one? Just remind us.
The next one is February 22nd. That's Ron Gibbs' talk on Washington.
Okay, so from
Actually, oh, you're talking about the next talk in general. The next one from us is April 6th that we're going to host. And that's Wes Brown's talk.
Good. All right.
You can find it all on our website, everybody.
Excellent. Thank you, Naomi. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you next time. Have a great time. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.